What comes to mind when you hear the words Mortal Kombat? It's been all over the place. Despite the franchise being over 20 years old, which is crazy, it's still going strong. And it's being carried by a team that cares a lot about it. Today, we're going to do a very, very tough list. We are going to rank all 11 mainline Mortal Kombat games. Welcome to Chaos Gaming. Do me a favor, make sure you're following the page with notifications turned on, ring that bell, and comment below. What's your favorite Mortal Kombat game of all time? Let's start off. This is going to be from worst to best. Like I said, this is going to be a tough list. Mortal Kombat versus DC Universe. Now, this shouldn't shock anybody. Now, the idea was cool. The execution, not so much. MK versus DC Universe took an awesome concept of two universes colliding and ended up disappointing both fan bases. The choppy animations, subpar character models, lack of gore, and a very stiff combat that made it feel like it had been slapped together in a matter of months. If there was a silver lining, it's that the failure of MK versus DC Universe resulted in NetherRealms taking over and rebooting the franchise. So, I guess it's a good thing. At number 10, Mortal Kombat Armageddon. One of the most controversial entries in the entire series. It was released in 2006 for the PS2 and the Xbox and is most remembered for its custom fatality gimmick. Now, the combat was largely carried over from the previous games, and a lot of effort was made to make Armageddon more casual with things like custom fighters. There was even a kart racing called Motor Combat. Seriously. Overall, it just felt like a big reskin of previous games, minus the fatalities, which was that's the reason people pick up the game in the first place. It's not a terrible game, but it's definitely lower tier in the context of this video. At number 9, Mortal Kombat 4. Now, MK4 still has a fan base because it's so cheesy. It's not that good, but it's cheesy. Released in '97, MK4 was the first game to not use digitized actors and instead used very, very crude 3D models. According to the devs, MK4 was a struggle to make due to the shift to 3D animation, as well as the fact that the team wanted to make the game super gritty and realistic, which was obviously not possible with the technology they had. As for the fighting, it's actually pretty good. Definitely a bit more clunky than its predecessors, but it had a nice punch to it. It made for some satisfying gameplay. So while MK4 may have been kind of crap overall, it has that certain so bad it's good appeal to it that gets it the number 9 spot. Next up at number 8, Mortal Kombat Deception. It deceived us. Released 17 years ago, it was a 6-main installment, and in terms of PS2 fighting games, it was actually pretty good. Deception kept most of its features from the previous installment, but with the addition of more characters. There was more fighting styles, more arenas, and a total redesign of the Conquest mode, although it wasn't very good. It was called the best fighting game of 2004 by many publications. While it may be considered a mid-tier Mortal Kombat Get Back game, it was a pretty solid product. I'll give it that. Now we're going to start kind of getting into the better ones. This is worst to best, so not everything's bad. Okay? Number 7, Mortal Kombat Deadly Alliance. Right before Deception, there was this. It was basically the game MK4 was trying to be. Released in 2002 for the PS2, Xbox, and GameCube, Deadly Alliance kept that 3D model approach of MK4, but with much more detail in the characters and a lot more fluid animation. It also introduced us to the idea of having 3 fighting styles for each character, which added a ton of depth to the combat, as now every character had 3 whole sets of moves and combos to learn. Deadly Alliance also had some of the most gruesome fatalities of the series so far, and that is saying something, and that was largely thanks to the improved graphical capabilities of the new consoles at the time. I think this is the best Mortal Kombat game of the PS2 era. Now we're at the halfway mark, basically. At number 6, Mortal Kombat. Yep, the beginning. It's where it all started. Released in '92. It took the arcades by storm, and it never stopped. I mean, the over-the-top violence, the fluid combat, unlike many other arcade fighters of the 90s, this one's actually aged pretty well. Now, there's some issues with it, but it's still fun. Compared to other fighting games at the time, Mortal Kombat was a bit harder, more methodical, less about just mashing the buttons. Then, of course, there was the impact. This game, man, it changed gaming forever. It helped create the ESRB rating as we know it today. And honestly, I think MK1 aged far better than some of the games that came before it, and for that, it's got the number 6 spot. At number 5 today, Mortal Kombat 9, released 10 years ago. This was the first game in the series to be developed by NetherRealm, and it was a full reboot. After Mortal Kombat vs. DC, NetherRealm really had to show people that the franchise had some life left in it, and MK9 did that in spades. Giant roster of characters, lots of stages, fast and fluid combat, some of the most brutal fatalities we've ever seen, plus MK9 had a full-fledged story mode with cutscenes and everything on top of the expected arcade ladders and challenge modes. It was jam-packed with content, and pretty much everything everything was a B+, I think. I think it's a top 5 game, and thankfully, I think it got Mortal Kombat back on track. At number 4 today, Mortal Kombat 3. Now, many criticized MK3 for being more of the same back in the day, but I don't think that's a bad thing. MK3 just really took the good stuff from 1 and 2 and added a handful of new things. Released in arcades in '95, MK3 featured good visuals, very smooth combat, and a handful of new characters. This was also the first Mortal Kombat game where you could run, which sped the combat up. It did. Now, it wasn't as much of an improvement over MK2, I guess, but to be fair, MK2 was really good. And speaking of that, our segue is MK2. Yeah. Few sequels will have such a jump in quality as there was between 1 and 2. Pretty much everything was improved upon from the previous title. Now, the first Mortal Kombat was a bit of an experiment for Midway. Mortal Kombat 2, it had a bigger budget, better technology, and a lot more content. It introduced us to tons of new characters, many of whom are still fan favorites, and it greatly expanded upon the combo system. Plus, more fatalities were added to the list, and it introduced us to babyalities and friendships as replacements. So like the original, MK2 was surrounded by controversy, but it's kind of aged like fine wine. And at number 2, here we go. Mortal Kombat 11, and the most recent entry in the franchise. It's been keeping fans happy. I mean, it has a few flaws, but it's good. It's really good. Released in early 2019, it carries over the speed and intensity of MKX while carrying on the story, because I know so many of you actually care about that. I actually do. MK11 was deep with combat. In terms of content, it did all the best things of MK9 and 10. Now, the downsides, however, come from the business model. MK11 was heavily criticized for its grindy progression, the abundance of microtransactions, and random rewards. It's a frustrating game because just about everything involved is great, but you already know. But at number 1 today, it has to be MKX. Has to be Mortal Kombat X. It was a toss-up between these two, but I've got to give it to X. Maybe it's because it's so fast, or maybe it's the art style. I don't know. I think it's the best in the franchise. Released in 2015, it was the 10th main entry in the franchise, and NetherRealm wanted to really improve upon the last. MK9 is rather cartoonish, and the game flow stuck pretty close to the originals. MKX, much more realistic, gritty. The gameplay was significantly sped up. Plus, NetherRealm brought back the 3 fighting style system from Deadly Alliance, and they brought back brutalities to spice it up. Fantastic game. I think many fans will agree with me that this was the best one. If you don't, that's okay. You let me know which one you think was the best, and I'll see you soon.